No one ever imagines that the true predators do not hunt in the darkness of forests, but in the marble-lit halls, at gala dinners, and within the chambers of power. Throughout history, the figure of the vampire has always been treated as myth, a literary metaphor for humanity's fear of death and corruption. But what if it had never been only that? In the year 1897, Bram Stoker wrote in Dracula that there are mysteries which man can recognize but not understand, and yet they exist nonetheless. Although it was a novel, his work was grounded in reports, legends, and ancient records circulating through Eastern Europe. The most unsettling detail? Many of those accounts spoke not only of beings who drained blood, but of entities seeking to infiltrate positions of power. Now, more than 1 century later, the questions return with even greater force. Could it be that these creatures, far from hiding in abandoned castles, have instead found in the skyscrapers of New York, in the corridors of the White House, and in the mansions of billionaires, the perfect stage for their existence? Obscure records from the Vatican, never officially acknowledged, speak of what was called the Invisible War. A document dated 1932, cited by the researcher Montague Summers in The Vampire in Europe, mentions a silent crusade against forces that feed not on flesh, but on influence. If it were merely folklore, why would such records be guarded so carefully in the secret archives of the Holy See? And so the question that haunts us remains. Are we facing a convenient fiction created to explain collective fears, or a secret deliberately hidden for centuries? Perhaps the evidence is no longer to be found in forgotten graveyards, but in closed meetings among bankers, in the hands that sign decrees, in fortunes that appear from nowhere. And what if the true vampires were never truly interested in blood, but in power, manipulation, and global control? With every step we take in this investigation, the sensation remains the same. The closer we seem to draw to the truth, the more it appears to conceal itself within the shadows. As the narrative unfolds, we begin to realize that the classic image of the vampire, with fangs and a dark cloak, may be nothing more than a convenient distraction. The reality could be far more subtle and terrifying. If, as the historian Paul Barber suggests, in Vampires, Burial and Death, published in 1988, the vampire myth was born out of humanity's attempt to explain inexplicable deaths, then why do the modern versions of this myth always seem to be linked to power, wealth, and political influence? In the United States, whispers of silent infiltrations have always existed. In the year 1960, during the presidential race, local newspapers in Washington published strange notes about so-called night societies that gathered in private mansions. Officially, they were merely exclusive social circles, yet curiously, some of those gatherings vanished from the records as though they had never taken place. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when we turn our gaze toward the great financial conglomerates, we find peculiar patterns. Fortunes built upon ruins, families that seem untouchable for generations, economic decisions forged at private dinners where cameras are never allowed. The sociologist David Skal in The Monster Show points out that the modern vampire is no longer the threatening foreigner. Now he is the aristocrat, the tycoon, the one who dominates while never exposing himself. And what if that is precisely what is happening before our very eyes? Not literal bloodsuckers, but social predators who drain energy, influence, and collective will. The shadows have shifted their ground. They are no longer in crypts, but in boardrooms. When these accounts are compared with records from the Vatican, a thin line emerges, the trace of what has been called the Invisible War. During the 20th century, priests secretly dispatched to New York, London, and Rome wrote of pacts sealed in the name of global stability. Yet between the lines, something else is suggested, a war against enemies who could never be publicly revealed, for the resulting panic would be devastating. And so the inevitable question arises, if such forces truly exist, would any government have the courage to confront them, or might it already have surrendered to them? Among the most disturbing fragments found within the ancient archives of the Vatican appears the name of a secret assembly known only as the Pale Court. Little is known about its true origin, yet obscure references surface in chronicles of the 15th century, such as in the writings of Dom Augustine Calmet, a Benedictine monk who, in his treatise Dissertations on the Apparitions of Spirits, published in 1746, already mentioned conclaves of the undead who do not drink blood, but who feed upon fear and influence. According to the records, the court did not seek ordinary victims, but rather rulers, bankers, cardinals, and even emperors. Their sustenance was not the red liquid, but the ability to manipulate, to sow doubt, to subjugate through invisible influence. It was as though the court had understood that to control a throne was worth far more than to dominate 1,000 subjects. And it is at this point that the accounts connect to an even deeper enigma, the one called the sleeper beneath Rome. In the year 1928, the Italian archaeologist Corrado Gatti described in private letters, now preserved in the Ambrosian Library, the discovery of a sealed tomb beneath the Roman catacombs. He spoke of a being of inhuman proportions, preserved intact, surrounded by inscriptions in late Latin that pleaded it should never be awakened. The letters ended abruptly only months later. Gatti vanished without leaving a trace. Could it be merely another legend? Or is it the proof that beneath the very foundations of Rome lies an ancient presence awaiting the right moment to return? When these two pieces are joined, the Pale Court and the Sleeper, a terrifying picture emerges. What if the infiltration among millionaires and governments is nothing more than the surface of something far greater? A millennial strategy preparing the ground for the rise of a force dormant, patient, and silent. The silence of the archives, the letters cut short, the accounts that never reach the public, all of it points to a single unsettling truth. Perhaps we are not at the end of this story, but at the prologue of something far darker. If the evidence can no longer be ignored, then the question that lingers like a whisper in the shadows remains. To what extent have the vampires already infiltrated the centers of power? For decades, confidential documents have pointed to silent pacts between statesmen and forces that could never be revealed. But how can one distinguish myth from truth when the very guardians of history themselves seem to have chosen silence? In the year 1976, the historian Peter Haining, in the Dracula Centenary book, wrote that the vampire survives because it adapts. It does not merely require blood, but the complacency of the masses who dare not question. And is that not precisely what we witness today? A society guided by the few, manipulated by decisions that never pass through the scrutiny of the people, directed by invisible hands operating far beyond politics. Some independent researchers claim that certain elites no longer work merely to enrich themselves or to dominate territories. The real objective would be to prepare the ground for the return of the sleeper beneath Rome, the entity that waits, unshaken, for the exact moment to ascend. If this is true, then the infiltration among billionaires and governments is not the end of the conspiracy, but only the prelude to something even more vast. And so the dilemma arises. Are the world's leaders truly in control, or are they already nothing more than pieces in a greater game, guided by an invisible court? What would happen if the truth came to light? The fear would not be merely of losing power, but of realizing that we never truly possessed it at all. Thus the mystery endures. Could it be that the United States,
The nation that presents itself as the guardian of freedom is already under the dominion of hidden forces. Or has the true war, the one that will decide the future of humanity, not even begun? If this story has made you think, if you believe that the truth may be concealed right before our very eyes, then subscribe to the channel, because this investigation does not end here, and perhaps the answers we seek are far closer than we dare to imagine.